Dear listener, today I thought I'll do something different. I woke up and I watched our Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi's speech, as I often do during this time of the year. I think this speech was very interesting, very crucial, I'd say. That it reminds me of some level, whenever I was listening to him today, it felt like there's an impending crisis that is coming, but he's not recognizing, or he's not exactly telling you exactly what that will be. But you can always feel that palpable sense. But he's there to tell you that we have done that, we can do this, we can overcome. You know, Almost all the themes that he touches upon goes through that. I think it reminds me of like speech by Lee Kuan Yew after the Singapore was not made part of Malaysia. Similarly, it was like FDR's speech after the Great Recession, Great Economic Crisis. Then his New Deal as a response. I think both all of them sort of are talking about actually it's not exactly coming at a crisis point, but there is something inside going in. There's a level of optimism that's required, a level of understanding of capabilities that's required. I think coming to this, he was facing I think two front issues. I think one of course, was Donald Trump's increasing of tariffs and almost 10 amount of sanctions on India's goods and services as 50%. On the other hand, you had Rahul Gandhi and the cohort of Congress raising questions on the, at some level, the constitutionality of certain things and also the independence of election commission. Now, BJP's stand has been that, it has decided to defend the honor, I suppose, of the election commission, and it said that raising questions and bringing down the bring election commission into this political discourses as the risk of getting this in supposedly or the constitutional requirement of the independence to be threatened by something of that sort. And I think he started that premise very beautifully. I think he got to both of these issues sometimes with one of those with one sort of paragraph or one very small speech. I think I'll be using a fair bit of Hindi in this because Hindi, I hope to give you some fair alternative to it through English, but it's always the case that the allegorical genius lies in Hindi because there are always some, even if for non-Hindi speakers, some of the tonality, some of the words that is used, it evokes emotions on people, and it tells you about something that perhaps in the English you don't capture. Yet, then he starts off by saying the Constitution, how he reasserts his commitment to Constitution and says that he talks about the Constitutional Assembly people, the ones who were responsible for the Constitution. He talks about Rajendra Prasad, he talks about Ambedkar ji, he talks about Shyama Prasad Mukherjee and Mukherjee ji in a later vein. He talks about how he sacrificed his life for nation, for the Constitution. Then he goes on to speak about this and he asserts his confidence in the Constitution and says that this is a great contribution to us, the Constitution. And then he doesn't waste much time talking about Operation Sindoor. Now the part about Operation Sindoor, I think, is more than the Operation Sindoor. There's another point that he made us very wary of that. He brought up Pahalgam terror attack, right? And he spoke in Hindi, and I think the words that are used there, Dharam pooch pooch ke mara gaya. And the disgust was visible in his face when he said that. It is that people were killed on the basis of the religion they were inquired about. And he talks about the gruesomeness of that whole thing. And I think it's very important, and it was, I think, a message to outside world as well as to our people that see this tariffs of the sanctions, so to speak, are as a matter of speaking that were now upon us, is also partly coming because we responded to something that was just, and we faced such a gruesome attack and we attacked, and because of that, it has led to some other country imposing certain measures upon us. And then he goes on to also talk about how colonialism has economically stifled us. We could not economically grow, and the colonialism was responsible for it. I think it was also a bit it was also somehow connected to the currently what we are facing in terms of trade. That we've faced this before. Some people have tried to put us down. Now, on this point, he further makes, and this is I think the most beautiful part of he driving at how to look at this problem, right? And it's the more perceptive sort of philosophical perhaps framework that he says, हमें अपनी ऊर्जा को किसी की लकीर कम करने में व्यय नहीं करना है. हमें अपनी ऊर्जा अपनी क्षमता बढ़ाने के लिए अपनी खुद की लकीर लंबी करनी है. And I think I perhaps messed it up a bit, but to speak in English, he is saying that we should We should not waste our energy in trying to bring some people down or bring certain say certain interests down. Or we should utilize our capability in giving length to our lifeline. At some level that you could say line is a lifeline. You could say supply line. Line is always a economic growth is a straight line. It talks about positivity. Line is something that is always telling you about your your imprint in the world. Lucky is the word that he uses. A beautiful word, and line will never capture that. Now, he this one is in perhaps reference to the fact that certain people in India were wanting certain responses from the government against the American government, that we should also retaliate by some measures. And it was to say that don't worry about it, don't think of that part, think about our own energy in investing upon us. And I think it was also an off remark, I suppose, to how he feels. I believe that the opposition is trying to bring him down, but rather than bringing him down, just try to build your own capability. Just work on those measures rather than be empty the person or empty the government itself. So, and then he touches upon, I think, from this point, I think that it is a segue from something rather also connected. Atmanirbhar Bharat he speaks about, and he speaks about how Operation Sindhu demonstrate that capability of India in the manufacturing, especially in the defense sector. How the Operation Sindhu was such a surprise for the Pakistanis; they could not even attack us. And there's also this interesting part. He says that Raddi Bhar ka nuksan nahi hua. That means Raddi Bhar bhi kuch nahi kar paye. I think if I have to get it correctly, I think he said Raddi Bhar bhi nuksan nahi kar paye. So it's that. Now, interestingly enough, the English translation would be that they could not do any loss to us, any damage to us. But the fact is, Raddi does have a value. We could say sort of slang word that Raddi Bhar ka ye hai. That means that the value you are thinking of is not that valuable. It's very low, but there is some value. So it's a very interesting way that Raddi is not exactly not having value, but Raddi has some value, but it is low. So it's like so low. So, but you can never say if it's too low or it is non-existent, because this word is like that. That's the beauty of it, right? So he also addresses the question about our loss in terms of aircrafts by saying that, and I think it was very interesting to address that. Then he gives a specific statement regarding the Atmanirbhar Bharat in the defense sector. He says that we should have our own jet engine. Yes, that is a requirement he thinks that we must have, and he also speaks about that. That is a very why should India stress about if some defense supply is going to come or not, if they will give their parts or not? We should build our own parts. We should be self-reliant, and we don't need to worry about those things. So he talks about national security and links it to self-reliance very nicely. So I think he then he does this very interesting. He goes to the very specific, then he goes up and goes to the top in the center and looks at from the larger picture, right? And for that he's using various tools, right? He's using when he's going too specific because the achievements, he's talking about the people. That he's not saying that we did it. He's saying that the people did that. The people's will was there, that we achieved this. We achieved 50% clean energy by 2025, which is supposed to be 100% by 2030, and we'll do that. And he's talking about different other factors like we wanted this to be done. How with the COVID-19 we showed resilience and everything. So he's talking about those things, right? And he's talking about in terms of what the people have done, what the people have achieved. On the other hand, he's also talking about the Samay ki Maang. Samay ki Maang is the time demand. So time is very interesting in terms of the Oriental world, right? Because in our culture, Samay is like Kal is very structural symbolism, right? It's Kal Bhairav. You talk about Kal is Samay hai. Samay ek Pani hai. Like there will always be, almost all cultures in India have some level of connection with some philosophical understanding of time. If you want to have a parallel, you could think of Xi Jinping, who also spoke about it. We live in an unprecedented times, a very famous speech. Unprecedented times, and it is talking about times, not exactly that the Prime Minister wants something, but he's saying that the time demands. And he goes through poetically this. Samay ki Maang hai goes very poetically, very beautifully in the end. I think he's also talking about the specific aspects, right? So the first is that the grammar is always of Samay ki Maang hai, the language is always of the people, right? The people is doing it, right? He talks about specific in the sense that he talks about GST, says that by Diwali this year you will have revised GST regime system and it will reduce rates of taxes. Now it is very interesting to note here that the inflation rate is going to go up anyway, and the GST, if they're high, that means the inflation will be higher, right, for the people to buy. So it is recognizing that, I suppose, that the cost of production is going to get too high. And it's not just America, China or something like that, but it will get higher because the cost of production is getting high, because the scales are going down, there are a lot of changes happening, and this transitional period will take some time for the production cost to look for to manage in the long term, to stabilize in the long term. Therefore, the inflation is going to go up, and the GS3 part is very interesting to note also. And alongside that, the income tax new policy that the government has brought on, that 12 lakh is non-taxable income. Now, it is very interesting. It also has to be seen in that fact that there's a lot of need for a level of savings at some level perhaps, and also the inflation. Right? If the inflation goes up, then you cannot just tax too much people too much, especially the middle class, right? That would talk about, and he talks about the new middle class that has just recently gone out, has gone above the poverty line, and has now become the middle class, right? Has breached that that lower class, and have now become the new middle class, and the middle class will have an alliance that will essentially the growth. So he's speaking of that. He's terming this as a portion which is most important for this economic growth to go. And I think there's an insistence upon that, on that period, on that part, or the section of the economic, I can say, configuration. Now, then he again goes through very specific sort of things, right? He talks about obesity as a fundamental problem. Now, I think that's a fantastic thing that the Prime Minister has come forward and said something that needs to be said, right? But he talks about that how the consumption of oil could be reduced by 10% by every household, then you could somehow get to the reduction of the obesity problem. But I would say that don't necessarily be the whole solution to it. I think one discussion needs to be happening on the part about protein intake of each average person in India, which is very low. So the calorie intake is high, but the protein intake is low, which can also lead to a level of the same obesity. The fact is that a lot of oils that have come now, extra virgin oil, olive oil, all these things are good for health, right? Not all oils are bad. We could have different views on what refined can do to your body, but I think refined is mostly considered to be problematic. Yet, kachi ghani ka tel, or I think there are certain things that needs to be considered in terms of oil, and opposed to how to get a protein-rich diet at a lower level of cost. So that's one of those things. Now. He gets, and interestingly enough, when he talks about how the Make in India project is going, and he believes that, and he said that by the end of this year, Made in India chip will be there available in the market. It's going to be observed very very interestingly to observe that is it really happening and whatnot. And if this is true, then I think this is also something that we have to give to the government that this is definitely a success. Now. And one interesting part where he goes about, talking about, defense. Of course, defense is a great part of it. He talks about Sudarshan Chakra strategy and these things, maybe, But, another point here would be reported by a lot of the media, international media, I suppose, is that where he says, in Hindi, he says, Bharat ka paisa Bharat mein rehna chahiye. That is, he's saying that foreign, we should not be dependent upon other countries, But I don't think it's a very protectionist statement, right? Because the times of the world has become like that. But I think there's still there's a caveat to that, is that for any society that is making a transition, that economic transition from an agricultural state to agricultural dominance or the manufacturing, then there's always the need of high investment and capital formation is fundamental to that. But if you look at India and if you compare to other Asian states, we have historically very low savings, and gross capital formation rate is very low. So due to which FDI is not only essential, but is not sufficient, but absolutely essential. So how do we look at FDI then? That is the most important question, because you cannot have a restrictive export policy to the foreign companies investing or foreign companies operating inside India, because of this something that China has been doing. But I don't think that is also a reason that most of the companies are diversifying now. So we need to have a more just more greater understanding of it, because the argument that is often used to against FDI is that it will crowd out our Indian producers, Indian manufacturers. But the fact is that if you restrict the export, then the cost of goods for the consumers are going to go high, right? Or they are going to, either that will happen, or something will, or they will just produce in bulk, reduce the price. Then again the crowding out, just. So I think export giving them I think a more favorable view of looking at these things is always that if any FDI is not only coming to give you production, giving benefits or something like that, giving tangible benefits, but also the intangible benefits that has more value. For example, knowledge, know-how, and how to build certain products in a certain manner. I think we should be I think done shoppingist. I think we should be done shoppingist in this front. Because see, one fact that has been clear, that no matter what Donald Trump says, I think Apple cannot shift or move. I think on the other hand, one would believe that Apple would have, sort of due to Donald Trump's pressure, would slowly try to uh, uh, reduce their exposure, I suppose, exposure, quote unquote. But actually, they have thought this out that now let's extend our supply lines inside India only, right? So they have gone expansion rather than getting isolationist about these things, right? So that's how corporates always think, right? It's so whenever we talk about this, I think it has to be balanced with that. Now, clean energy part, right? 50% has been done, and I think it's a great achievement. But we should also, I think, the task is tougher on the next 50%, because I think certain reports have said, especially Financial Times, not long ago in September, that the budget that is required for the 100% completion is $2.4 trillion, especially invested only this part. The 50% that has been achieved has also been largely to be contributed to the private players that have now entered, which were supposed to be government institutes, right? The airports, all these government new sort of energy sector that is rising. Airports have been one of those that pretty much is going very forward, very fast towards green hydrogen, reliant, institutes. Now, but again, in the northern India and some parts of southern India, I think actually southern India and some parts of northern India, you have a good infrastructure of renewable energy sources, right? Solar panels. I think a lot of this, so a lot of these things, dams, so on and so forth, is not exactly available on the eastern front, right? Because eastern front is natural resource rich, and therefore coal is still very dominant in if you look at Odisha, Bengal, Assam. I could be wrong, but that is perhaps a long back statistic that I perhaps might have read. So, and the Financial Times report is there. So this is definitely I think that's an achievable thing, achievable. uh, and it's going to be very interesting that how this transition is made, given the fact that oil is again a matter of great debate. So he talks about financial discipline also, and it's going to be very interesting given that high debt to GDP ratio is now a common theme, and he talks about financial discipline that is going to be crucial for economic growth, right? And coming to the later parts of it now, if you he's repeating this, right? Uh, he's repeating this Samay Ki Mang Hai, and in one of the ways he's talking about all this matters is also very sensitive to the political and needs also. I mean, it is not all that is a visionary document that is divorced from the political immediate reality. I think one such point is the part of a demographic subversion, or he believes that illegal immigrants have come up quite a lot. They have done a lot of criminal activities inside India. They have especially rapes, and he talks about Mahila Suraksha also in that same breath. He talks about, and he says that the government has constituted a high-powered demography division, that is to look at the fast-changing demographic states, or the division or the districts, that is the demography is changing very fast. Now, it has to be noted that it comes at a time when you have the electoral revision of certain special investigation, review, special this thing, electoral commission doing some checks on these things. And the Supreme Court has given a favorable judgment to the favorable intervention to the election commission, and also the Assam government's land eviction drive that is going on, where blacks of states of land have been evicted of illegal immigrants. So I think it's very interesting. I think it's something that we need to look much more closely about around like the high-powered demographic division, right? The last part of it, when he comes all this, he moves from this helicopter ride, he goes down to the very minute, then he goes up. It's like above the frame, then again getting to a very specific point, right? At the later end, he says that when he's saying the Samay Ki Mang Hai, he talks about how emergency, and he doesn't exactly address the question about election commission, the vote choice, so to speak, but he addresses the question in a different manner. He says that it's the Congress government that had done the emergency, and those who did the emergency are the killers of democracy, and those who support this are people should not support the killers of democracy, should not. And it's just basically the way of showing the mirror to the opposition that see, don't try to do this to us, we know what you did, right? Something like that. So then that is where he ends poet. Then he goes to a poetic end, right? And he's been talking about Samay Ki Mang. Now he goes on a more poetic note. He says, जो बड़े चट्टानों को तोड़ता है वही समय को मोड़ता है. That means that the one who can bring down large rocks can only change the course of time. And he repeats it, जो बड़े चट्टानों को तोड़ता है वही समय को मोड़ता है, और यही समय की मांग है, और यही समय की मांग है. And that is where that what he's talking about. He's not talking about a time that is very rosy, a time that is not, that the time that is sort of that is sort of linear. He's talking about this time that cannot be the way it is going. We must, there are some hurdles, and we have to overcome those hurdles. And when we overcome those hurdles, then can we get get the fruits of our results. We need to, and this is the requirement of. So he's not exactly talking about one time frame; he's talking about multiple ones. So that you can understand that. And I think in that framework, one thing I would like to add, the most positive thing is that I suppose was the state's state's work, state's role in like social life of people. He says that it's the government shouldn't be in fights; it should be in life of people, right? And he talks about how the government should go door to door like any other company goes for delivery systems, right? It should be that effective, and I think it is the most brilliant part. And thank you. See you next time.